A woman of color, the daughter of a colored man and a Native American woman. Now, this same woman was born around 1840, just before the American Civil War that resulted in the abolition of slavery. This woman was short in stature, but her spirit was so passionate that her Native American name from the Chippewa tribe was Wildfire. Listen about the first African American and Native American female sculptor of the 19th and 20th centuries, the unstoppable Edmonia Wildfire Lewis. Welcome to Inclusive Art, Arte Inclusivo Bilingual Podcast. For this episode, listener discretion is advised as there will be explicit content meant only for mature audiences. For this episode, I used the book The Indomitable Spirit of Edmonia Lewis, a narrative biography by Harry Henderson and Albert Henderson. I really recommend it. It's a really good book, and I'm going to leave all the information in the notes. And also I'm going to leave all the other sources I used for this episode. Most sources confirm that Edmonia Lewis was born between 1843 and 1845 in upstate New York, although some say she may have been born in Ohio. Her father was a Haitian-born African American, and her mother was a Chippewa woman. Edmonia was orphaned before the age of 5 and lived with her mother's nomadic tribe until she was 12. Her older half-brother, Samuel, also known as Sunrise among the Chippewas, left the tribe and moved to California during the gold rush. Then he became a hairdresser and made a small fortune when he was in California and thus financed his sister's early studies in Albany and also helped her attend Oberlin College in Ohio in 1859. While at Oberlin, she took the name Mary Edmonia Lewis. Oberlin was a pro-abolitionist college at a time of much conflict in the history of the United States. The Civil War was about to break out. Oberlin was the only school that accepted not just African Americans, but African American women in its classrooms. However, the racism and discrimination were tangible. It was 1862. Imagine Edmonia. She had 2 roommates, both of them white women. It is not very clear what happened, but apparently Edmonia served them wine containing cantharides from the Spanish fly, which is an aphrodisiac. Both roommates fell ill and soon recovered, but they blamed her for poisoning them. Edmonia was arrested and put on trial. She was represented by African-American attorney John Mercer Langston. A few days before the verdict was delivered, on the night of January 31st, as she was crossing the courtyard, someone grabbed Edmonia, covering her mouth. They took her away so that her screams were not heard. Until then, Edmonia had grown up as an equal, first with the people from her tribe, and then with people at school. She worked very hard and showed her intelligence day by day. Her attackers did not like that, so they tried to humiliate and destroy her. They beat her, raped her, and left her for dead in the cold winter in the snow. But there was a fire inside of her, a fire that didn't allow her to give up. Hours later, people noticed her absence. A search began, and they finally found her. They took care of her and healed her wounds. She couldn't remember who attacked her. No one investigated. No one was charged. No one filed a lawsuit. Unlike the 2 poisoned companions, no one did anything to seek justice. Her trial was postponed, and the judge finally found her not guilty due to lack of evidence. And believe it or not, Sometime later, she was accused of stealing art supplies there in Oberlin College again and was not allowed to graduate. But like I mentioned, there was something inside of her, a wildfire, a passion for making art. Possibly with the advice of Langston, the lawyer, and her friend Frederick Douglass, a writer and orator, Edmonia moved to Boston, an abolitionist city that was also considered an artistic city. Some sources say that while she was walking down the street and came across the statue of Benjamin Franklin, this moment, supposedly, is what made her take the decision to become a sculptor. With the help of Douglass and Reverend Henry Highland Garnett, two of her abolitionist friends, Edmonia arrived at the Boston Liberator newspaper offices looking for William Lloyd Garrison, who helped her find a tutor. After several attempts, sculptor Edward A. Brackett finally agreed to be her instructor. Edmonia learned to work with clay and marble and began selling medallions based on Brackett's works. These medallions were usually made of clay, like portraits, showing the profile of a person in relief within an oval that could measure up to 30 inches or 75 centimeters high. It was rare to see subjects of color as central characters in the arts of the time, as you can probably imagine, and sculpture was no exception. One day, Edmonia found out about Anne Whitney's work and her sculpture called Africa Awakening. For the first time, Edmonia saw an idealized African woman sculpted in clay, a study that was done before the marble sculpture was made. The two women met finally, and Anne was intrigued by Edmonia. If it was not common to be a woman sculptor in those days, it was less common to be a woman of color and a sculptor. Since Anne was older and more experienced, she also became a tutor for Edmonia. It is when Edmonia had already acquired some experience that she decided to make the bust of Colonel Robert Shaw. Imagine that you are in 1863 in Boston. The famous 54th Regiment arrives in the city, passing through the streets on its way to South Carolina to fight in the Civil War. The regiment was formed by African American soldiers and its colonel, Robert Shaw, a white man willing to give his life in favor of the abolition of slavery. It seems that Edmonia was there the day of the event, watching the regiment leave for war. Sadly, they did not return. They were called heroes in Boston. They were defeated on July 18, 1863. The sacrifice of the soldiers, all of color, and their colonel, represented the entry of a new force and a hope of balancing the war in favor of the Union. Boston mourned the regiment, and Edmonia surely wanted to express her admiration for Shaw through her artwork. Edmonia met other abolitionist women of the time, such as Lydia Maria Child, who was an editor. During that time, Edmonia started to gain some fame. Child knew the woman sculptor Harriet Hosmer, who lived in Rome. When Hosmer came to visit Boston, she stopped by Edmonia's workshop to see her bust of Colonel Shaw. She admired the bust, analyzed it, and then said, "Come to Italy. It is a good place for a woman. There you will learn in a year what it will take you a decade to learn here." With that invitation, and with the help of Boston abolitionist women Maria Weston Chapman, Charlotte Cushman, and Anne Quincy Waterstone, Edmonia arrived in Rome in 1866. It is said that in Rome she also had the opportunity to develop her spirituality, as she was a devout Catholic. It was then and there where her style became neoclassical, as she sculpted many works such as the bust of Minnehaha in 1868, a Native American woman, a fictional character, Hiawatha's love, described in the poem The Song of Hiawatha by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Edmonia also made the bust of Hiawatha that same year, which is currently on view in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. One of her most famous works is the sculpture The Death of Cleopatra, sculpted in 1876 in Rome. The sculpture was brought from Rome to Philadelphia for the Centennial Exposition, and later brought and stored in Chicago. It was bought by a horse racing fan and placed on the grave of his favorite horse, who was, by the way, named Cleopatra. It remained on the property that later became a golf course, then a munitions factory during World War II, then a post office building. At some point, a group of good-intentioned Boy Scouts painted it white. Until 1987, yes, 1987, the Forest Park Historical Society found it among the Christmas decorations of a shopping mall center, and then it was taken to the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where it was finally restored after many thousands of dollars and the white paint removed. It remains there until now. Regarding her Death of Cleopatra, the art historian Charmaine Nelson says, "The associations between Cleopatra and Black Africa were so profound that any depiction of the ancient Egyptian queen had to contend with the issue of her race and the potential expectation of her blackness. Lewis' White Queen gained the aura of historical accuracy through primary research without sacrificing its symbolic links to abolitionism, Black Africa, or Black diaspora. But what it refused to facilitate was the racial objectification of the artist's body. Lewis could not so readily become the subject of her own representation if her subject was corporeally white." I invite you to take a look not only at The Death of Cleopatra, but also her other works, and pay attention to the details if possible. Like every episode, I will leave the links to see and learn more about this artist. Other of her artworks are Forever Free from 1867, Old Arrow Maker from 1872, Hagar from 1875, and General Ulysses S. Grant, who commissioned his marble portrait and posed for her. And there's many more. The themes of her works are very often related to her identity. Her main subjects portrayed in her works were usually non-white people, raising a lot of eyebrows. Native Americans, African slaves, people of color were immortalized through the hands of Lewis and her unstoppable fire, and topics almost forbidden at the time, an art expression that many did not understand. Italy, however, a place a little less racist than the United States, allowed her to work on this type of topics with more ease. She returned to the United States for a time in 1898, but soon realized that there was no place for her there. Racism was still palpable, now with the rules known as Jim Crow, rules in favor of segregation, instituted by the Supreme Court of Justice. She spent her last years in London, where she died on September 17, 1907. Her grave, located in St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery, was in very poor condition. Art historian Bobbie Reno raised funds to restore it. She has a video about her, which I recommend, available on YouTube. Reno also explains in her video that today at Oberlin College, there is a center called the Edmonia Lewis Center for Women and Transgender People. There have always been a great number of opinions regarding Edmonia Lewis. Many people recognized her, and she gained fame and followers and was loved and admired by many. Yet another group of people showed their continued hatred for her, being not just a female artist, but a woman of color and mixed race. She never married. Possibly the sexual assault she suffered as a young woman left scars on her. Or it is possible that she was just not interested. It is not known for sure. Even many of her friends ended up turning their backs on her, and at some point she expressed that the only one who was interested in her success was her brother. But it wasn't because of bitterness. It was rather that her lonely life must have been rooted in many factors related to identity, race, and the ideas of the time. She used to say, "I was practically driven to Rome in order to obtain the opportunities for art culture and to find a social atmosphere where I was not constantly reminded of my color. The land of liberty had no room for a colored sculptor." Her friend Anne Quincy Watterson, for whom she also made a sculpture bust, wrote the next poem about her. And this is just a fragment, but I will leave the link below so you can read it later. She hath wrought well with her unpracticed hand. The mirror of her thought reflected clear. This youthful hero martyr of our land, with touch harmonious she has molded here, a memory and a prophecy, both dear. 'Tis fitting that a daughter of the race, whose chains are breaking, should receive a gift, so rare as genius, neither power nor place, fashion or wealth, pride, custom, caste, nor hue, can arrogantly claim that God doth lift above these chances and bestows on few. Her audience, mostly white, did not know how to interpret the importance of her works. Little by little, she's starting to receive recognition, and attention is being paid to her work. She was a pioneer of her time, and she embraced her identity and portrayed her roots, leaving a legacy and a desire to embrace diversity in art, which should spread, like her name, like a wildfire. This bilingual podcast is produced and researched by me, Rebecca Navarro. If you like it, please subscribe on your platform of preference. You can comment, rate it, and share it. You can also follow Arte Inclusivo, Inclusive Art, on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email me at arteinclusivopodcast@gmail.com. I am leaving all the links below for reference. Thanks again for listening, and let's make exclusive art inclusive.